Hi, my name is Kozan, and I'm a monk at SokukoJi, where I practice with the guidance of my teacher Sokuzan. We rely on your donations to support our programming of practice, study, and teachings, and to fund scholarships that help our full-time practice residents with tuition and living expenses. Thank you for helping our Sangha.
This morning's Dharma talk is titled Stories Upon Stories, or Stories on Stories, Story After Story, Stories About Stories, Stories. And what I would like to say about that is to, first of all, be aware that you're doing that. Be aware that when something happens, this happens, this happens. And we have a story. We make little tiny, we're little short story writers about everything. You know, a one sentence, a paragraph, or something like that. And that's totally fine and appropriate. We're going to have some kind of a reaction to something as long as you're in the human realm, the physical realm, or in the six realms. You're probably going to react or act towards something, away from something, or shutting something down. One of the three. And then various combinations there. Probably the nuance there is just too complicated. And you don't really have to go into that. What you have to do is, what do I say over and over again? If you don't understand what I'm saying here, you could ask some questions about it based on your difficulty with that. I'm saying it's always about awareness. There's nothing to conclude. There's nothing to even understand in the relative sense, in the sense of oh yeah, I see. I think I understand that now. Now I understand how to build some lawn furniture, or now I know how to do. There's so many things. Now I know how to speak fluent Mandarin. I wish. So you can learn some things. You can actually learn and get that and have that, and other things. The kind of learning often called, if someone has some understanding of it, and even if they don't have understanding, might call it wisdom. It's an understanding that doesn't have to do with collecting information, although that can be a part of it, of course. We all study kinds of teachings that have to do with lots of language and understanding and using logic and using reason. So sometimes it's called the provisional teaching. Sometimes the provisional aspect of teachings reaches way into more difficult areas, trying to get the concepts to help you kind of crowd you or nudge you into the ultimate understanding, which the ego feels like falling off a cliff or going into an area that this is too dangerous in here. I'll just stay back here just into the conceptual area where I still have somewhat control that you thought you had, that you actually never had. You've never had any control. And I'm not talking about being able to pick up the coffee cup or not. And that type of control is pretty obvious. But that's where the ego mind will get its credential from. It'll say, well, I can do that. I stopped doing that and I'm starting to do this. And there's some teachings, some therapies, some 12-step programs and on about ways to control things. I'm not against it. I'm not against it. That may be choiceless for you to go that direction. And for some people, they don't even hear me say that. They're listening to someone else, or they're listening to their own mind stream, listening to the stories. It isn't that you shouldn't listen to the stories or even generate the stories. We're not trying to not have stories. We're not trying to any of that. What we are endeavoring to do is train our minds so that just by sitting down and holding still, taking that aspect of consciousness, sometimes referred to as the human form, holding it very still without demand, without rigidity, without some of the macho things that are sometimes incorporated, because some people think you have to have very strict this and that. I'm not saying you don't. You might need that. If you do, go find someone that teaches that. They'd be happy to instruct you, tell you what to do, give you orders, hit you with a stick even. But I am saying, recommending, suggesting that you observe what is coming and observe what is going and observe what kind of hangs around. Observe what's going this way, what's going that way. Because eventually that looks like anger and aggression, and that which looks like passion, grasping, greediness, and getting something, having your way. You want this. Second noble truth, wanting things to be different than they are. This doesn't mean that when things show up that don't align with your fundamental desire for something, that you should just go along with them. I'm not saying that. Don't go along with anything. Don't agree, don't disagree, don't look away. If you do any of those three or any combination of those three, this nourishes that part of the consciousness that I refer to as many people do, ego, narcissism, self-centeredness, the greedy part of the mind, the hope and fear part of the mind, the paranoid part of the mind that doesn't want that but really likes this over here. You can't stop that because it is an illusion. It's an illusion. So that's how it keeps its hideout secret. But you can take away the food chain. But you have to do it respectfully, slowly, with no demand. And we do that with what? Awareness. You're slowly changing your allegiance. If you're following what I'm saying, you're slowly changing your allegiance over from the demanding part of the mind that wants this, wants it right now. And if it doesn't get it, it wants to know why. And some people rotate in that their whole lives and make other people and themselves miserable. They don't know they're making themselves miserable. They just know that they're getting rid of some of their misery by bossing other people around, ordering them around, sending them into war. So awareness, the kind of, and even this misses it to some extent, where we're changing our allegiance over to just, the pure precept of be with all things, pretty close. Being with the practice of being with all things, is to see how we can't quite do that. We can do it. I get quite a few credentials by saying, "Oh yeah, I'm more with that. I don't get as angry now, and I'm more peaceful, and I'm more." Looking for any kind of credential. The very credential you are grasping at is actually gets in the way of you seeing more fundamentally what this is. When you see fundamentally what this is, you won't see anything. Sorry to inform you. Actually, I'm not sorry. I'm delighted to inform you of that. And I would be even more delighted if you would hear what I'm saying, apply it. I don't have to be around to see you do that. You can go somewhere else and do it. So what we do with the stories is something happens we don't like, and we describe it. It's a story. Because you can't actually describe what happened. All you can do is translate what you saw into what you think you saw. And if you really see what's in front of you, you will be speechless. This doesn't mean you might not find a way to communicate what you saw using language, using hand and arm signals, like a semaphore or like American Sign Language or something, to try to show what this is in a language that possibly your student, if you have any, will understand, or maybe your own mind stream. Pardon me. So by watching, by observing, not by stopping the stories, but just watching, be responsible. The ability to respond. Be responsible. You're not to blame. Not to blame for anything. You're not to blame for what happens in your mind or in the world. The cause and effect don't necessarily show up as in that in the very radical form of, well, if she hadn't done that, then this wouldn't have happened. It will. The bigger picture, the deeper aspect of that. Excuse me. You have to see it. You have to see it yourself, because if you don't see it yourself, you'll always have doubts about it. But if you see it yourself, you don't have doubts about anything. Even your doubts don't have doubts. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. This was discovered. This was understood centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries ago. The Dzogchen teachers, are pointing to that. My nose is probably pointing to it by itching so much. But everything that looks like it's pointing to that is only pointing to itself, because there isn't anything else but this. And this can show up as anything, just like anything can show up as this. We're just using relative language to talk about something that's absolutely, fundamentally, totally, and relatively inexpressible. You can't talk about this. That's why I say you'll be speechless for a while, until you see that people are suffering. and they're suffering 3 feet from you. They might even be suffering inside of you. Fundamental understanding has no location. Relative understanding is all about location, where and how many barriers between here and there, and how far is it to Houston, as if anybody wanted to go there. So what happens is something occurs, and then instead of just receiving that, and when I say receive, you may receive what it is in the form of what shows up and your reaction to it. If you invest something in the reaction to it, as if I'm right and that shouldn't be happening, the very nature of warfare, the very nature of peace fear. And when I say peace fear, I'm saying the peace fear that eventually turns into war again. Don't join any part of that merry-go-round. But if you do, be aware that you've just done that. Be aware that you've gotten onto a circle, sometimes pronounced in other ways. Gotten onto it. You don't have to get off. Just see what it is, and the circle comes apart. The whole structure of that falls apart. But it's not a credential for anything. It doesn't lead to anything else. There isn't anything else. So when something happens, we tell a story. And then, if it gets more intense, then we might tell a story on top of the story. Then stories about stories about stories about. This is what the title of the Dharma talk is, stories on stories. And we just can, and what does that do? What does that satisfy? What does that nurture? That nurtures the self-centeredness, an incredibly powerful narcissism that we think we're validated in thinking and blaming, and well, it's because of what she had and of they had and of. It's like, isn't that obvious? I mean, the whole culture is telling us some things like that we should do. That, well, everybody thinks. Well, everybody knows. How many times have you heard those phrase fillers? They aren't even phrase fillers. They're just the way we operate to make sure that we don't have to look at the truth. And what is the truth? You don't exist. Something exists. And if you're identified with this body-mind, death comes without warning. And who you think you are is going down. But who you actually are doesn't go anywhere. It can get worse than that. It might be better to go down with that body, be in the ground for 18,000 years. Consciousness still is down there without any sense of time. Will this happen? Am I condemning you to something? No. I'm just telling you what I've been looking at for a long time. And only in the last 10, 15 years had the courage to even talk about, because I knew I wouldn't necessarily get agreement from anybody. I don't need any agreement. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it. And you can see it too. You don't believe me. You don't have to join me. If you come here and say, I want to be a monk, you're going to have to do a lot of convincing before I'm going to allow you to sew a robe. I don't want anyone to be complete. Story upon story. The first story is bad enough. The second, third, fourth story are even worse. And how are they bad enough or worse? It's just that it makes it that much more difficult to see the fundamental situation. As you back away from the original fright or fear that showed up that you covered with a story, well, they shouldn't be doing that. Or I really want this, and I demand this, and I should have this, and I feel so terrible, I must have to have this. This should be mine. It's my territory. I know I own her, I own him. Just because you're married to somebody or you're in a relationship with somebody gives you no rights about them. None. None. Now, the culture might be saying all kinds of other things to you. But if you do something with somebody else, with them or at them or around them without their permission, without their explicit permission, this includes a child. But you can't just go in and do anything you want to a child because, will you ask them? No, you have to see who you're talking to. If you're talking to an 8-year-old, you better know what they're able to understand and what they're not. You can't just go in and use them. Even if you're their parent, be very, very respectful to the confusion in others and the confusion in yourself. Stop trying to fix yourself. Because if you fix yourself, if you succeed, then you just have covered something up that you have not, that is, it turned a spiritual path into a mundane path of improving or getting better. I'm not kidding you. has to be seen, and it can be painful. It can be very, very painful to someone who's been practicing for many, many, many years, and to see how disappointing it is to see that you are not going to attain the enlightenment you thought you were. The enlightenment that the Buddha realized, his body, I'm not saying it literally did, but his body, when it went up in light, went up in flames, because there was no longer a person there, even though that person still wore robes, and monks still circumambulated that teacher. Story upon story. First story, the second story, and then coming in different angles to try to lock that down so you can somehow be protected, so you can live the rest of your life protected from the unknown, or from the fundamental, one of the fundamental misunderstandings that you think you have control about anything. A little bit of control, but not much. And so again, to say it another way, it's not about stopping those stories. It's not about stopping the suffering or stopping anything. It's about receiving it. If you're suffering, receive it. Don't look for reasons why. I'm not saying you shouldn't get your tooth pulled, or you shouldn't go to the doctor to see if you have appendicitis. Of course you should. You should do both. You should relate with the relative world as it is relatively. Some things you're going to get some help with, and some things you aren't. Maybe you should have a therapist. Maybe you should have a psychiatrist. Maybe you shouldn't be meditating at all. Maybe you should have a 12-step program. That's up to you. I'm not here to promote anything other than awareness. Be aware of who this is and what that is. Simply put, who this identity is, and what this apparent identity is out here that you're probably projecting on to others. How do I know about it? I'm doing it right now. Everybody I see, I'm imagining who they are. It's just that if you do this, you get closer and closer to the fundamental obstruction that each person has, including yourself. You can't get rid of your negativity, or of your stupid ideas about who you are and what you lost and what you should have gotten. You know, how people don't understand you. That won't necessarily go away. We're in the middle of a retreat. This is the first time that all of the monks, all 14 of us, have gotten together at one time in one place at the Black Stag, which is a house out in the country. And it feels pretty good, wouldn't you say, to be here? Nobody's nodding, so I guess they have their own ideas about it. And should they? Yeah, they don't have to agree with me. They have no idea what I'm even asking when I say that. It feels pretty good, doesn't it? You know, where does everyone go? I don't know. Does this feel good? What does he mean by what does he mean by feel good? You don't really need consensus. You don't need to vote on anything. Communication is important. It's to receive what is happening in front of you. And that means when something happens, if this happens, and we have a story, Sokuzan just hit his kotsu on the table, made a sound. I think he's going to try to teach us something again. But then we add on to that. He shouldn't be doing that. That's a holy device. He shouldn't be abusing it. Or I hope he slips and hits his head with it. Or I wonder who made that. I'd like to get one of those. Or I wonder if that's made of, what's that one material? Oh, wood. I wonder. Or we go around everything. And that's a silly example. I can give you a stronger example. You think someone has done something to you, and rather than actually see the fundamental nature of what occurs in your own mind stream, you'd rather blame somebody for it. Rather than be responsible for your feelings, you'd rather, it's just easier, simpler to just, well, I don't want to feel that, so if I blame, that takes some of that pressure off from you. It's always about awareness around that, not about never telling another story. If you can do that, then you actually, some aspect of consciousness is opened up where there's no longer there, in the seventh consciousness of the Yogacara tradition, there's no longer a guard at the gates of the either end of that consciousness, making sure what comes out of the alaya doesn't interrupt with what needs to happen in the seventh, or what comes out of the 5, 6 sense fields including the mind and their objects, isn't disagreeable in some way. So we have to protect. And how do we do that? Through this could be harmful, or this could be beneficial, blah, 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 blah. Excuse me. So for the 100th time, it's about awareness, not about succeeding. It's about awareness. It's not even about being more aware. It's about whatever awareness is there, that's the awareness, rather than try to ramp up to do something to be more aware. But do we do that? Yeah, we do that too. Yes, we go into retreat so that we spend lots and lots and lots of time just watching the movement of the mind, so that when, as I've said before, we'll say many times probably, if I have some time left, about watching, observing what comes and goes in the mind, so you get to know what this incarnation is that you think is a separate self from everybody else. So something happens, tell a story about it, then we tell another story, and then we have variations, and then we have preambles, and then we have prologues, and then we have on and on and on, trying to flesh it out so that we have as much protection from that as we can get by interpretation, idea, projection, elaboration. And one final thing, and then I'll take some questions. It's about the awareness of that. Because if you try to stop doing that, it just builds an ego that's trying to stop doing that, or reinforces that part of consciousness that's curled into a ball of snakes that it doesn't want to get, does not want to non-exist. It doesn't even exist. It just thinks it does. It's an illusion that we are deluded by. Excuse me. So the first question, I think, is in the chat box, and I'll go to that first, and then I'll take some questions here in this Zendo. Wulong says, who is in New York, says, how do we recognize a fundamental, quote unquote, desire? What makes a desire fundamental? Is love a fundamental desire? You could say that. Fundamental is just desires grasping, but it also can be tied in with the desire for somebody to get the hell out of here and never come back again. So it can be tied up in ignoring who that is and what that is. Actually, you're sending, every time you send anybody away, you're sending the Buddha away, in some sense, in every sense, and in the sense I'm speaking of. You're sending it away because you're unwilling to just receive what comes to you, because the feeling that, well, it might be a poisonous snake. It might be injurious to my health. And yes, it could be. But when we say, how do we recognize a fundamental desire as something that you want someone else? And when Wulong is asking, is love a fundamental desire? Well, could be. If there's any demand. The kind of love I'm talking about, and I'm endeavoring to refer to towards the spiritual path, is a fundamental appreciation for everything. No matter how ugly, how smelly, you appreciate that. That doesn't mean you wallow in cow shit, but you appreciate that is part of, that is an expression of this incredible realm called the human realm, or the six realms, or the whatever, however you want to characterize it. Receive it. Receive the smell. Also, when you receive the smell or odor of that negative situation, that you're not getting your way, so therefore you're slowly changing into a pleasant angel who's great as long as they get their way. But when they stop getting in their way, then the horns start to come out, and their skin starts to turn red, and the eyes turn red. Suddenly, we have that coming. You can't stop that. You can't get rid of it. You don't need to. All you have to do is stop protecting yourself from that, which creates more self-centeredness. That doesn't mean you invite the demon into your house or into your clothes closet. But receive that energy as much as you can. See what it is, rather than object to it, get rid of it, blame someone else for it. So there can be a love that is more of appreciation. It's without grasping. If you really fundamentally love another human being, regardless of the spiritual path, you're not going to be trying to prevent them from doing things you don't like, because you love them. This shows up more with parents and children It also can show up the other way, where the parent has been so tortured in their life that all they do is punish their children because they project their issues and problems on the child and try to correct something they can't even correct in themselves, so they transfer it to their child and beat the hell out of them. I know I've been there. Used to beat my children all the time. No, I didn't beat them, but I certainly wanted to a few times. So love, appreciation, or respect, or kindness without demand. You don't need anything out of it. You're getting because if you really love, then you are that love. The whole environment is love. Even if you get irritated by this or that doesn't cancel out your basic understanding. You're still a person. I sometimes, not in defense of anybody, but I sometimes talk about teachers who have a reputation for abusing someone, saying you cannot control your karma. And what do? We take someone who's maybe helped thousands and thousands of people, and then we find 2 or 3 incidents that they did, something they did that we weren't even there. We just heard a rumor about it. We weren't actually there looking at it, but 2 people were there looking, and then you had to deal with their interpretation of what was happening that filters right through their 7th consciousness, which means that unless they're awake, if somebody is not awake but thinks they're awake or thinks they're close to being awake, they're going to judge. If you see what this is, you can't judge anybody. You're not only tongue-tied, you're hand-tied. You're not even alive anymore in the conventional sense of operating in relative truth of fire, dirt, air, wind, and passion, aggression, ignorance. You have to see it. I'll help you with your permission. If I don't have your permission, then do whatever you like. Live your life. Enjoy your life. We'll meet again.
Very bowing.
Go ahead, Terry.
Could you say more about what you're pointing to when you say tongue-tied?
Yeah, you can't see. We get. I mean, what is it you want to know about that? I mean, I can elaborate, but I want to make sure I'm responding to what it is you want to know.
Very bowing. I don't know. It just struck me when you said that. That it seemed like you were saying that whatever's there is there, and you're just tongue-tied about. And what I heard, I think the question is around communication or expression. What does tongue-tied mean?
I don't know.
In the situation,
I don't know. I'm not sure what you're asking me. I know what tongue-tied. It means you can't say anything. You can't. You see something, and you can't say anything about it because you're receiving that. The receiving of this, what this incredible world actually is so powerful that you're just going to receive it. You may never teach anybody.
very bowing. So is there a sense of powerlessness or just overwhelm or with tongue-tied when you're talking about tongue-tied?
Yeah, powerlessness and slowly realizing you've never had any control. I can move this stick from here to there, but that's a very simple relativity that just goes with being a consciousness showing up in a relative form called a human being. But you're not just a human being. This is very temporary. So, but then the idea, because we can move this from here to there, we feel like, well, we should be able to do a whole lot of other things. We should be able to stop our negativity or stop our temper. And you do have some say-so, but that say-so is about watching the outflows. Something inflows, something comes in through the alaya vijnana or vijnana, and something comes through down the hallway in your house or up the front steps, or at your kitchen table, or in your society, in your culture, across the ocean, in your mind stream in the middle of the night. Receive, receive, receive. Don't abandon what you receive for what you think it is. So the tongue-tied part comes in from knowing that you don't really know what anything is. Fundamentally, you can't speak about it in an individual way that is going to make sense in the traditional sense of something making sense.
Very Bowing, how do you function inside of that? Just
It's much easier. It's much easier that you don't make any. You no longer make any choices about anything. I'm not saying you don't decide to have more coffee, or you don't decide to move the stick from there to there. Say this is dependent origination in its very low frequency form. This caused this. This hand moved. Where did the hand come from? We don't know where this came from. I didn't make hands. Did you make hands? And why did you put so many fingers on it? It's like it's a dumb kind of thing to say, but look at we look in the mirror every day and think this is us. It's not you, nor are you separate from that. We have no say so, but we can participate with. If your understanding of dependent origination is deep, to use a relative expression, then you can participate with this. You can dance, as it's called sometimes, way before I got here, dancing with phenomena, because the phenomena arises, and the only thing you can do with it is dance with it. Because if you fight with it, we have war. If you ignore it altogether, we could have more war. You can't ignore it. You can't grasp it. You can't fight it. You can't. But what you can do is whatever shows up, receive it. That's why you notice the nose doesn't produce anything. The nose doesn't produce smells. The mouth doesn't produce language or food. The ears don't make sounds. You might say, well, yeah, thanks for all the help. But we tend to get in that area where we assume that we have some say so about this. Not much.
very well, thank you, Sokuzan.
Yes, sir. Questions in here?
Bowing. Earlier you said there's a short story, kind of everybody knows, fill in the blank. How does that keep us from participating or receiving when we produce a statement like that?
We're putting something out in front instead of receiving. We're producing something based on, could be any number of things that you could point out, but it's not so much watching that happen in such a way that you can kind of cut that off and stop doing it. You just have to be aware that what you're receiving, you're blocking out by producing. You're producing thoughts and ideas. As soon as somebody walks in the door, instead of receiving what this is, along with what arises in the mind stream as shall we call it, a reaction to it, anything that comes up, it could be, I don't know who this is, or who is that? Did I get close, or is there more?
Bowing. Is there a part of that is participating when we're with somebody sometimes, or is it just strictly off limits as far as
you're
receiving?
The idea there is to, as much as you can, to just receive, and at some point even that's still path, ground path and fruition. Suffering, this is difficult, and I say if you want to find out where you're at on the path, go to the first noble truth. Still having difficulty with that? You're trying to crank up things like, well, not always. Well, don't lie to yourself. If you're on this path, you know what I'm talking about. This is difficult. This is not a walk in the traditional gold fields. It's difficult. Receive the suffering of yourself, of your own mind stream, and the world. Don't do anything with it. You don't have to produce some kind of a big project around it. Go ahead.
Going with the teaching, like you don't improve or don't fix ourselves, can that become something we fixate on and actually stop looking at what's in front of us?
You could just respond that way. I'm not going to fix anything. Like sometimes people say, if they quote me without really knowing what I'm saying, and I would say, don't quote me. Sokuzan says, don't do anything unless you have to. So that's what I'm doing. Bullshit. You know what that is when you start using that, quoting me instead of looking at your own. You may be able to use that, but if you're ever using me as a backup to something, not a good idea. Reminds me of Yun Men, who got upset with us. Didn't he get upset with his students when they started quoting him or something like that? Go ahead.
Shadow bowing. I think similarly, you have a teaching, don't do what you're told.
I do.
Sometimes should we do what we're told?
Yes, it's situational. So the only reason I'm saying that is there's going to be a time when you don't do what you're told. Set up no standards. There are other ways of teaching this in the Tibetan tradition. There's probably a lot of people have heard that in the Tibetan tradition, whatever the Lama says or whatever the Guru says, that you need to do, and that's just and that in those medieval times and even in current times that may if you have a teacher that's telling you that, what I would say is he, she, they are your teacher. You have the connection with that, then you probably should be trusting them. I just don't teach that way. I wasn't born in Tibet. I wasn't born in Japan. Obviously, I was born about 10 miles from here. I'm literally a nobody. And I like it that way. It's very comfortable. It's almost painless. If it weren't so painful. So more about that? Good area.
Shadow bowing. Some of this is coming out of the fact that we're in the monk retreat.
Yes.
I'm wondering if there's more of a need to do what we're told.
Well, there's some of that because we're in a form. We're following a form, observing a form. I'm trying to follow the form also, insofar as my situation will allow. So yeah, everyone here is a fully ordained monk. So, and so I didn't. If you remember back, I didn't promote this to you. I might have even tried to talk you out of it. I talked myself out of it for years. I thought about it way back, a long time ago. But I'm not going to do that. I don't need that. I don't want anybody telling me what to do, especially another monk. More?
Shadow bowing. It seems like it can trigger, like being told what to do by the teacher, opposition. And I'm wondering if there's something that you're seeing that would actually be beneficial for us, like when you're asking us to do something.
Well, I'll always start out by asking you, and then eventually I may tell you, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. But I don't. There's no retaliation. I'm not taking your robes away or making you meditate out in the wilderness with no food for 10 days. I'm not doing some. There's nothing. Anything that comes back from that is your karma. It's when I say your karma, I'm not saying something bad. 3 people I could say, do this, do this, do this, or will you please do this, or just, I really want you to do this to help me help others. I often say that to people. Help me help others. That's all we're doing here. So you may or may not do it, but I'm not going to give you some kind of negative marks, or there's no test. So, but it would be for all I know, you can't do that, or you just don't want to do that. You're not going to do that. Your karma won't allow you to do that. I mean, I can make up all kinds of stories about it. And I'm sure there are a lot that I don't even know about. So, but I may need to tell you that or ask you to do that. More about that, and then after I'll go to Chisho next. But do you have anything else about that?
Shadow bowing. There was a response you gave to me in a talk a while ago where you said that you're functioning as an aspect of my mind that I haven't recognized in myself yet.
Of course.
And I'm trying to see how we can see that and not just project that you're somebody telling us what to do.
Sit a lot. Keep sitting. Train yourself to recondition yourself to receive, even though it starts to smell or stink or feel bad or feel like somebody's controlling you. Receive as much. Look and see how much I've control anybody. I had a lot of training. They're called on not controlling people. They're called wives and children. And then what I got from my stepfather and my mother and my uncles. Less is better. Don't do much. Don't do much, but sit down a lot, hold still. This kind of less is what I'm talking about. Less is better. Sit down, sit symmetrical, watch the mind come and go until you realize your true nature. Until. And there's no guarantee. You may sit the rest of this life. You may have to sit 3 more lifetimes. It's not a threat. Not telling fortunes. I don't know. I really don't know. If I ask you to do something or tell you to do something, you don't do it. I don't immediately go to they're disobeying me. I'm no longer in the Marine Corps. I know what it means. If you disobey somebody, you get thrown in jail or in the brig or get court-martialed. So we're not going to do that. It's about controlling people, not interested. I like communicate, cooperate, collaborate. That's what we're doing. That's why we have this retreat. Pretty amazing here and where we're at and the community we have that we're able to do such a thing. But we don't do this by telling people what to do or setting up some kind of a highfalutin standard for monks. More. Chisho, you have a question?
Ishabhai, you teach that the first noble truth is life is suffering and not part-time.
Yes.
It's suffering. Having said that, why do you pick pain or disappointment and those kind of negative things to indicate suffering? Why wouldn't you say joy is on the path? Path is joyful as well. Even that's also suffering, isn't it? Bye.
Yes. I didn't have to. You just did it. I don't have to say it. I mean that. I'm not just being flippant. I'm saying you're saying there's enough positivity out all over the place. People are teaching it everywhere. There's not enough emphasis on the disappointing part of the path. And there needs to be. I'm not doing this because I thought it up. I meet people, lots of them. I mean, not thousands or hundreds, because maybe if I met everybody for 30 seconds, I could do that. But I meet people for long periods of time. And I'm not a counselor, and I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a monk. If I have even, I don't know if I can even call myself that. I guess I am a monk. That's still some kind of a concept that people project onto. But I'm here to point you or me, and I mean it. I'm not a hero, but I'm willing to give up anything to do that for you or for anyone who gives me permission. And if you don't, then I respect that. You can do what you want to do. But of course, the joy or the bliss on the path, that has to be seen. I'm not going to promote bliss, because bliss is not separate. It's not relative happiness, relative suffering, ultimate happiness, ultimate suffering. You can take all those ultimate relative things and mix them together into a Waldorf salad. It's just a big mixture of things that you can't locate anything in it, because it is so dependently arisen. What could you translate the words pratitya samutpada into English as it is, rather than as it is conjectured to be? What does that mean?
Prati iti would be almost this and that. Prati iti.
Prati iti.
Yeah. Some utpada, some would be together, and utpada would be produced.
There we have it. So we just said it. Pain and pleasure. Pain and pleasure are not separate. As my teacher would say, are ornaments which it is pleasant to wear. If you don't see that, then you'll continue to pick sides and go to war and torture yourself and torture others and make others incredibly uncomfortable, if not out and out torture them or hurt them. And so, but they're also not two. I mean, they're also not one. Just because they're not two, that doesn't mean they make up a oneness, because anytime you make a one, you have something else. Even if that oneness over here is just a space in which this occurs, the relativity, as long as we're in a human realm, as long as we have these nerve endings, these 5 skandhas, we're going to continually grasp at something else and shove something else away. It's about observing that rather than fixing that or trying to become a better whatever. Go ahead.
So I understand that pain and pleasure are not two different things. But if we keep talking about pain and disappointment and all that kind of stuff, are we grasping that then, Bhavin?
Sure. That's what I'm pointing out. But when we grasp that, instead of just grasping that and seeing the grasping and being responsible for the grasping, as soon as we start to grasp at the suffering, we immediately convert it into, I'm the one who's suffering, and it's because of him or her or what they did or what's been done to me. We abandon. So if all you did is just see the suffering, you're a Buddha. This is all the Buddha did, is he grasped. It's heartbreaking. He received it. You could say he grasped it. He had to do something with it. So it came in, tumbling in the doorway, and he embraced it. Life of suffering, the cause is wanting something else. And as soon as the something else came in, he realized that is the awakening. You want the awakening, but you have to go through the door of suffering, my friends. This does not mean nihilism or torturing yourself or being hit with a stick or sitting in retreat without food. No, I would say go to retreat, take some food. Even the Buddha made himself comfortable when he finally got an idea what was going on. He didn't sit on rocks or go without eating and so on and torture himself. He just received the suffering that's just the natural part of being a consciousness in a human form. Go ahead, sir.
Drawing. So when you say you have to go through the gate of suffering, do you mean the gate of life or gate of suffering? Bye.
All of that. Living, life, incidences, marriages, divorces, job loss, job gained, all the different things that we're all human beings here, it looks like. I haven't checked anybody really close. It looks like we're all in the human realm, with just maybe one or two exceptions there. Yes, there's a kitty cat. That cat wants to be in the human realm, but is pretty much out of luck for the rest of this life, other than they get to be cuddled and hugged and fed really well. Right, Michelle? Right. Yes.
Eric Antaya from the Traverse City Sangha
Eric.
says, when the stories we add on are habitually negative perceptions of possibilities, and we have a lifetime of training to direct the imaginary nature in that direction, what forms can we employ to retain our imagination to appreciate the positive potentials or opportunity to share our gifts with the world?
Forget the last part. Just sit, see what this is. I'm not saying world, but there'll be no sharer. There'll be no identity getting some kind of credit for being this wonderful sharing person. That's what the ego is looking for. Ego wants to be a person who shares and is kind, and credentials, called spiritual materialism. Not interested. And when I say not interested, I am interested, and then I want to help you if you're on the path and you get stuck in that area of trying to improve, trying to get better, trying to use spiritual techniques to do this or that. It's not that teachers don't do this. Atisha's 7 points of mind training is full of suggestions on how to work with this kind of negativity or that kind, or the 4 karmas, pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and destroying, is a way of skillful means of working with particular negative kinds of energy, where you don't start right out by hitting the person over the head with your coat suit. You start out by pacifying. Well, what can we do about this? What would you think if this could change? How would it look to you if this changed for the better? We could use that. We could talk to people in that way, reasonable. So it's not about avoiding that altogether, Eric, but it's about not trying to find a technique where we can just do that. Work with the mind where it's at. Work with your mind where it's at. And where is it? I can tell you right now, after this teaching is over with, or maybe before it's over with, go sit down, hold still, face the wall, and ask the question, what is this? You could also do the other mistaken identity. Who is this? And then wait. But as far as trying to find a way to be more kind and sharing and all of that, I'm not saying there aren't a lot of elaborations on that. YouTube is full of those. Everything, everybody's trying to fix or move, and quite often they want to charge you a fee. Should they? Right? If they are charging you a fee, then perhaps they need to do that.
He edited what I probably said. He said, what forms can we employ to retrain our imagination to appreciate the positive potentials?
I don't think in positive potentials. The whole positive, negative, trying to be more positive. And it's not that there aren't a lot of practices where you're actually doing that. Tonglen is one of them. Maitri Bhavana is a way of working with that. Praying for others, a simple gesture of putting others before yourself. Instead of, here you have some time on your hands, but instead of doing just using that for whatever I want to go and have something to eat, instead I'm going to speak about others in a way that changes that dynamic a little bit. So I'm thinking about someone else and praying, supplicating. You're not supplicating a deity. You're just looking at everything. The more you begin to understand dependent origination, you'll see that whatever this is has no location. It's located. Things are located everywhere. That's otherwise you couldn't lose anything. You can't lose your watch if you can lose your watch, but you can't lose your sense of time. You can't lose things. You can't lose who you are, but you can cover that up for lifetimes. Jishin.
Jishin bowing. You said we don't exist. What exists? Bowing.
So it's been talked about different ways, and I would have to quote teachings I've heard in the past that seem to do something in the consciousness if we say things non-exist. So they exist in this way, just like a dream, something you have in a dream, an experience you have in a dream. You dream that you were in the middle of a fight and somebody was killed, or perhaps possibly even you killed somebody, or hurt yourself, or you were another person altogether. Those exist as experiences and as dreams, and sometimes when you're right in the middle of the thing, it's just horrible. It's a nightmare. Like we're in studying with Chezan and other monks here, the dream yoga practice, doing different practices over the next couple more days. And Shoto had a nightmare. We got up at 3:45 in the morning to have a kind of a check-in in the middle of the night about working with lucid dreaming and different practices that approach that way of working with the mind. And he had a terrible nightmare where his head fell off. Wasn't that it? Your head fell off? No, his teeth fell out, and all of his parts of his teeth were in a little bag that he had. So is that real or unreal or what? No, it has a reality, but there's no location around. You can't find that, and there's no past and future to it. It doesn't show up that way. That doesn't mean that when it occurred, you weren't really, or he wasn't really terrified or upset, weren't you? Pretty upsetting. We all had nightmares. It's very upsetting to have those kinds of, and it also can be extremely pleasant to have a dream where you're getting your way, you're getting anything you want. You're in a God realm where things are all pleasure. Sir.
Shoto bowing. When you were talking with Chisho, you brought up how life is suffering and not part-time.
Yes.
Does that wipe out the second noble truth? Like, does that mean that there's no cause for suffering?
So there's still a path quality to it there. So there's still, as long as there's nerve endings, there's going to be a path quality, and it's going to come and go. The continuity of it shows up in the consciousness, not in what's happening in your life. That's the translation, as I understand it, of the word tantra, or continuity. And it's having practiced a little bit of that, that's how it shows up for me, is to see that the continuity is not about the forms coming and going. It's about the consciousness. More.
Does the first noble truth, that's the right word, supersede the next three? Is that the primary truth?
I don't know. why don't you sort it out and get back to me? I mean, it doesn't seem to be, I'm not saying we couldn't do that or have an exchange here. Maybe in an interview, it might be more happening in that area. But to go into that, and I really, and I'm saying this sincerely, I really don't have the skills of logic or something like that to deconstruct that in a way that you'll have fun with and I'll be worn out. Follow me? Don't you have a master's degree in nuclear physics? I don't think you can get a master's in nuclear physics, can you? What was it? Scientology? Yeah. Okay. English literature?
I didn't even get that.
You didn't even get that? Huh.
College participation trophy.
Oh. Well, I can give you a monk's retreat trophy. What should we use? A banana? So further, go ahead. I'll get back to you, Chisho, just a second. Go ahead.
Is going relatively into what's arising in the mind stream inherently fueling confusion?
Describe a little bit more of what you're saying, going relatively into what's happening in the mind stream.
I think like exploring what shows up as a story.
Stop it. Stop it. Just observe the story. Don't explore that story. All you're doing is empowering that part of the mind that thinks and analyzes and conducts, especially with your particular style. I wouldn't necessarily say that with everyone, but I definitely would with you. And it's because the way in which I perceive, I don't know how your mind works, I probably will never know, but the way I perceive the way your questions arise, especially personal stories when we talk face to face, I would say don't do that. Most important thing for you to do is to observe, develop, you want to use that relative term, or nurture the observing part of the consciousness, not the thinking part. The thinking part, or a thinking part of your consciousness aspect, the fourth skandha, the traditional way of talking about that, is already really, really strong. I can't keep up with you. I don't need to. There was a time when I would have thought I would just been intimidated by your intellect. I'm not impressed by that now. You hear me? No, I'm not impressed. I appreciate it and I respect it. But it also is getting in your way. Do I know that? I don't know anything. But you're a student of mine, so I cannot help but respond to you. If someone else, if anybody doesn't give me permission, I can't teach anyone if they don't give me permission. I won't, I can't, I don't know how. I actually get what I'm saying from you. Like when you ask a question, if you don't ask questions, you'll never know what I'm looking at. But if you ask questions, you'll find out in a hurry. Most people won't ask me, but you will. You follow a little bit what I'm saying? Just aware. Anything that moves, just watch it. Anything that shuts down, watch it. Anything that shows up intellectually, don't get rid of intellect. Don't get rid of your thought process. Just watch it come. Watch it go this way. Watch it go that way. Watch the emotion or the feeling or the texture or the thought process that is coming up with a little thought balloon that says, maybe I should go deeper into this. And I should, what would I say to that? Not exactly. Reflect on it a little bit. You should do exactly what happens. You're already just observing. But now, if you're actually watching something, you don't need the instruction, just observe. Do you follow?
A little bit.
It needs to be more than a little bit. Because otherwise we're double doing it. We're doing it and then we're doing it again, and that's a cover-up. So if you're already observing, just observe. If you try to be an observer, that's ego. You can get back to that later. Chisho.
Going back to my train of thought previously.
Yes, sir.
So on the path, in awareness practice, is awareness of negative, let's say pain, more conducive than awareness of pleasure? Bye.
I don't. I'm not saying it couldn't situationally and show up that way, where maybe that might be something that would be, something to think about or contemplate a little bit. But I don't think you can make a statement like that. I mean, you could make the statement, but I don't. The way I understand the way you're asking me is, I would say not necessarily. No. It's just that quite often the whole suffering part is something that is covered up because it's difficult.
Bowing. So that's where I was probably going, which is if pain or negative stuff don't come up too often for me, for example. I mean, various things come up, but not necessarily, pain and suffering and all that stuff. Should I go looking for it? Bye.
How many hours a week do you sit facing the wall?
Around 20, I guess. 20, 21.
20 hours? Yeah, okay. And what is if you don't mind sharing this with me and with everyone else, and what is the actual practice you're doing when you face the wall?
Just watch what comes up as much as possible, meaning, of course, I'll go off into some rabbit hole and then come back, return to watching.
Okay. Keep doing that. Further questions? Yes.
Ross from Ireland asks, is the ignorance in this mind stream dependently originated?
So anything that arises that you can point to, like ignorance, which is it's an aspect of consciousness that is closing off or shutting down or looking the other way. It's actually inventing another way so that it can look there. There is no other way. So the way you're asking it, I would say yes, but fundamentally no, because what it actually is, there is no name for that because it's not separate from awakening. That has to be seen. Otherwise you'll divide and conquer and divide and lose. Yes.
There's a second question. Is it from a choice that my mind stream made before?
Well, that's a pretty speculative. It could be. I wouldn't see any value particularly in going in and doing that. What I think has value is just watch what moves. He's already doing a lot of sitting practice. Just continue to sit, return to the wall, return to the wall, return to the three jewels, return to the study of the Dharma, so that your intellect is being included in the wall gazing, not by thinking about the wall, but by separating that out. You sharpen the blade over here and you chop over here. If you don't chop on the wall, you don't look at a sharpening stone and start chopping on it, facing a wall. Nor do you have to fight with that. Little thoughts come up or thinking comes up, which for some people are pretty intense and pretty strong and pretty commanding. With, for instance, with Sokuzan, is a very powerful intellect that is used to going in and just taking everything apart and looking at the parts, going deeper into that. Just observe. Where are we at? Are we done? Is there a final question out there in Zoom?
Naveed bowing. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll do Kayun. No, I'll do Kayun, and then I'll do Naveed. Wait a minute. Yeah, we'll do Kayun first because you're smiling more. No, wait a minute. He's competing with your smile.
Kayun bowing. I have a kind of slice of life question, stories about stories question. There's somebody in my life that I'm very close to who over the last year I've noticed they've become more and more bigoted in a particular area about a particular group of people, which I'm kind of shocked by. And so I'm wondering, how do I respect that person's confusion and sit with my own desire to like show them charts and graphs and prove why they're wrong without, well, I don't know, how do I navigate this situation, Bowing?
Yeah, I'm following. And the first thing I would say is, are you already listening to this person quite a bit?
Yes, and they're a Buddhist as well, Bowing.
Okay. So that, you know how far that goes. People call themselves a Buddhist, but may not be all that aligned with what the Buddha taught. So it's difficult to come into that without knowing more about it, but I would say that you're probably doing fine with it, other than it's just irritating to you. You know, that you feel like they're doing this and they have this lined up and this looks pretty good and they're practicing, or they have a teacher, or whatever's happening there. And you know, I've had students that had one student for a while was sewing a robe, and he was I love that guy dearly. But he several years ago, when all the politics went on its head, took some books. It's On Tyranny is the name of that, by Timothy Snyder, into the White Tara, which is a community area of the monastery, and just laid them out for. And I just thought it was a really good description of what really short book that tells you how that begins to look when someone tries to take over everyone else. Thought it was helpful. He got really upset with me, and I couldn't understand what. Well, why wouldn't you? He said, well, you're just leaving that. I can't quote him. Can you remember anything he said? It's just kind of so outrageous, and it so surprised me, because this fellow was. And this is someone who had done a month-long solitary retreat, so he'd done a lot of practice. But the karma that showed up in his mind at some point just took his whole brain pan. And I don't mean this judging him. I don't know what it's like to be him, but it must have been really, really horrible. I really loved him. I know he loved me too, but we had to part ways. And finally, I said, he never finished his robe, but he had received Jukai, a Raksu. He'd sewn a Raksu, been a student for many years. And I just said, I can't remember exactly how it went, but I said, send me that Raksu back. You don't need that anymore. I said, send that back. And he said, oh, I kind of hesitated. I said, why do you want it for? I said, you give that back, and that way the vow is gone. And then you know, I don't know what I said about it, but my way of thinking about it is that way he doesn't owe me anything, or we've broken that connection. Doesn't mean he isn't still a bodhisattva. Maybe he is. Maybe he's the Buddha. Probably is the Buddha. And so, but he did send it back, and I think I sent him a book of drawings. A long time ago, he gave me a blank book, and he says, "Can you draw a bunch of things in there?" And so I filled up a book of. So it was a little bit of a trade, I guess you could say. But it was a you know, I respect him. I think he respects me, and I haven't talked to him in a couple of years, I guess. It's been a while. I probably will never see him again. But at one point, I was getting ready to ordain him, and yeah, I'm not saying that couldn't have happened. But anyway, so your situation there, I would just say less is better. Is this someone you see every day or talk to every day?
Kayan Bowing, no, but we're very close, and we interact quite regularly.
Do you ever tell this person, I think you're a bit off on that particular consideration?
I haven't yet, but I feel like it's coming. Like, I feel like I can't not say something about this. Like, it would just be too egregious. And not because, like, I'm co-signing her view if I don't correct her. It's just so against my sensibility that I feel I would, at some point, would need to say something if we're going to continue to relate.
I think it would be fine to just sit down and you know, over tea or coffee or whatever, and just say, I've got something I want to talk to you about, and I, you know, and you can, of course, the best way to approach any kind of a criticism, to start out with compliments. You know, I really like you, and you're wonderful, and I think you have, you know, I don't know who does your nails, but, you know, can I have their number? But you can start out with sorry for being silly, but it's like that. It's like be kind of a folksy about it until you get to the point where it's very, very definite. If a person is expressing some kind of prejudice around something, and you're going to have to continue to include this kind of stuff. And so just make it clear. The downside of that is then they will stop talking to you about it. So maybe altogether. But the other way to do it, and I would say this would be something you certainly have the skill to do this, is ask them more about it. Say, that's as you know, I probably don't feel that way, but could you say more about what is it that supports this point of view? Let's talk about this. So that might be the most, without being too seductive about it, which I know it's hard for you not to be seductive, Kayun, but I think you can do it.
Kayan bowing. Well, the experience of listening to this person was precisely tongue-tied. I was just so stunned. I couldn't really say anything. And that's, so maybe, I think maybe asking them more about it would actually
include it. But first start out by, I don't agree with any of that, but I'm really curious as to how you would take that position, because there's no way I could do that, or something along that line. Just, okay. Anything else? Okay, one more question, Navid, and then we'll close.
Navid bowing. What is so difficult about the path that takes several decades or sometimes several lifetimes to know our true self? Bowing.
I think there's so many. That's a good question. I think there's so many different obstacles, and our own thought patterns, our fear, our judgment, our knee-jerk reaction to things that are just we can't somehow get in front of that enough to even see that we're just reacting to something that it's not really none of our even our business what we're upset about there. It's not about us. It's about whatever situation is there that is dependently arisen. It just takes so personal, and so I think taking things very personally reinforces a self or an ego, and this is relentless about wanting to have its territory, and so it just takes a lot of time. And to come back to the basis of your question is. So many distractions. That's why people become monks. But even monks in our society are still a lot of distractions, because our society doesn't support somebody just looking at the wall and training their mind for a whole lifetime. We don't have that yet. I think that may be coming eventually, but it might be quite a long time. So I think it's just difficult because of your conditioning, your upbringing, your culture, and what you've been told, and what, if we went back into so-called lifetimes, which there probably are something like that, it might not be a personal thing, but as soon as the body-mind drops, the whole personhood kind of drops out of it. But the causes and conditions that were fueling the personhood are still there. And if they're rumbling around there, they might find another way to come back, another womb to enter, so to speak, to come back into this realm, or maybe another realm that we don't even know about, to try to get what they didn't get, to try to get that. And that could be anything from wanting power to wanting to help everyone. The Bodhisattva vow will also bring you back here. The vow to be with all things, the vow to save all beings, that can bring you back also. There's no guarantee of anything. There's no way to know when you receive a vow, observe a vow like that, what that's up against in terms of your own personal karma, insofar as there is a personhood of sorts arising in lifetime after lifetime. There really is no identity. It goes from lifetime to lifetime. That's actually Pratitya Samutpada, also dependent origination. Very good. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you all again for all of the help you've brought to this practice center, this monastery, this community sangha, which you are a part of. So thank you very much for all of your help. And again, asking to, if you can, to continue to help us. If you appreciate what is being done here, and there's a lot more to see if you go on the website and look around, a lot more that we're doing and endeavoring to do, please help us. And thank you.